Hi friends, welcome to my YouTube channel BAMU'S BIOGENIUS. Today we will discuss about membrane proteins. This topic is very important for UG and PG students. So stay with me for membrane proteins. Now we all know that plasma membrane is the most important part of the cell. Even plasma membrane is also present in the cell organelles also. The structure of a cell plasma membrane and organelles plasma membrane is same. This plasma membrane contains different kinds of proteins and these are known as membrane proteins. Now, what is the function of this plasma membrane? Plasma membrane is meant for regulation of exchange of material in between the cellular environment and the external environment. Now, these functions, whatever the function, that means that may be a absorption, that may be a respiration, that may be a transport, whatever it may be, that is carried out through plasma membrane and with the help of membrane proteins or proteins that are present in the membrane. And that is why 30% of the cells proteins, they are present in the plasma membrane. So that is the importance of plasma membrane proteins in a cell. Now, these proteins, as I have told you, that these proteins are responsible for transportation of various types of solutes, ions, from outside to inside or from inside to outside. It is also responsible for cell-cell communication, or we can say that the whatever the receptors proteins or receptor proteins that are present on the plasma membrane, they are responsible for communication in between the cell and the external environment. Then various types of proteins are involved in the formation of energy. For example, the chemical energy that is present in the food, that is converted into a kind of a storage form of a chemical energy. Such a kind of transfer, we can say that the transfer of energy is, or we can say the storage of energy, that is carried out with the help of proteins. Then, um, because of this importance of the proteins, most of the pharmaceutical drugs, they are targeted for these particular types of proteins and they can alter the functions of the cell. So this is the importance of membrane proteins. Now we know that the cellular organelles, they show a different kind of we can say the functions. For example, the lysosomes have a specific type of a function. Endoplasmic reticulum is having a specific type of a function. Why there is a functional distinctness in the cellular organelles? How this is carried out? This is carried out with the help of membrane proteins. So these membrane proteins are very important for proper functioning of the cell. Now, these membrane proteins are classified according to their structure, their association with the plasma membrane, and their orientation inside the plasma membrane. So that we will see. Now, you can see here, this is the concept map of membrane proteins. See, we have seen that in our cell membrane lecture. Membrane proteins are of two types: peripheral membrane proteins and integral membrane proteins. Peripheral membrane proteins means what? They are present on the periphery of the plasma membrane. So that's why they are called as a peripheral. Integral means what? Integral means those proteins which are embedded, which are inserted inside the plasma membrane. These proteins are called as a integral membrane proteins. Now, why peripheral membrane protein will anchor or will remain attached to the plasma membrane? That is with the help of covalent interaction. So two types of interactions are there actually, covalent interaction and non-covalent interaction. So this is known as the peripheral membrane protein. Now integral membrane proteins, they are attached to the membrane proteins in two ways. One is known as transmembrane proteins, or they traverses or they penetrates through the membrane, and that's why they are called as a transmembrane proteins. And another proteins, they are called as a anchored proteins. Now these anchored protein means what? They somehow, these proteins are attached to the uh, plasma membrane entity, whatever it may be, that these are known as anchored proteins. Now, when we talk about a transmembrane proteins are of two types. If they pass through the plasma membrane at one time, then they are called as a single pass. If they pass through the plasma membrane multiple times, then it is called as a multipass transmembrane protein. Now, single pass transmembrane proteins are of two types, that is type 1 and type 2. So this is about the transmembrane proteins. Anchored proteins, these proteins are anchored through lipid chain, then lipid chain anchored proteins. If they are anchored through GPI, then they are called as a GPI anchored protein. So these are the types of integral membrane proteins. Now we will discuss about the first type of membrane protein, that is called as a peripheral membrane protein. Now why these are called as a peripheral? That is because these membrane proteins, they remain in the periphery of the membrane. These membrane proteins, they cannot penetrate the hydrophobic region of the plasma membrane, and that's why they have to remain on the periphery. Now how these membrane proteins remain attached to the plasma membrane? That is because of the two types of interaction. One interaction is a non-covalent interaction. In non-covalent interaction, the force that binds together these membrane proteins and peripheral membrane proteins and the membrane, that force is that may be an electrostatic force, or that may be by forming a hydrogen bond with the plasma membrane. So this is known as a non-covalent interaction. And we know that what is a covalent interaction? If that particular membrane proteins, they are forming a bond with the a lipid molecule that is present in the plasma membrane, or with a protein molecule that present in the plasma membrane, then such type of a bond is known as a covalent bond, and the interaction is called as a covalent interaction. So this is how that these peripheral membrane proteins remain attached to the membrane. Now these membrane proteins are, as they are attached with the plasma membrane, they may be, or this interaction is very weak, and that because of that these proteins can be removed by some chelating agents, or by urea, or by carbonates, or simply by changing the pH of the medium. We can remove such type of peripheral membrane proteins. So the example of a peripheral membrane protein is a cytochrome C. So this is about the peripheral membrane proteins. You can see here the diagram. In the diagram, you can see here this particular protein, green chain of the amino acid, that is interacting with the membrane protein. So this is known as a non-covalent interaction of a surface protein with a transmembrane protein. So this is a red color transmembrane protein that is already present inside the plasma membrane, but this green color protein is called as a peripheral membrane protein because it is present on the peripheral side of the plasma membrane and interacting with the protein. So here the interaction may be with the protein, membrane protein, or that interaction may be with the lipids. So this is known as a peripheral membrane proteins. Now the second type of membrane protein is called as integral membrane protein. Now, as I have told you that these membrane proteins, they are embedded, they are penetrate inside the plasma membrane, and that's why they are called as the integral membrane proteins. Now, these proteins are associated with the hydrophobic region of the plasma membrane, and they are embedded inside the plasma membrane. So that's why these are called as integral membrane protein. Now, why such kind of integral membrane proteins, or we can say that how this integral membrane proteins can penetrate through the hydrophobic region of the plasma membrane? That is because these integral membrane proteins have a sequences of non-polar amino acids. So the non-polar amino acids will interact with the hydrophobic region of the plasma membrane, and the polar regions of this particular amino acid chain of these membrane proteins, they interact or they are exposed to the hydrophilic region of the plasma membrane. So that's why uh, because of this peculiar nature of the membrane proteins, these membrane proteins are able to penetrate through the hydrophobic core region of the plasma membrane. You can see here, this is the hydrophobic region, and these are the non-polar amino acids which are present in the hydrophobic region. So non-polar amino acids have no difficulty in occupying this particular region, but the polar amino acids, they can't occupy this particular region, so that's why they are exposed outside. So polar amino acids, they are on the hydrophilic region of the or hydrophilic side of the plasma membrane, whereas the non-polar amino acids, they are present on the hydrophobic region of the plasma membrane. So this is the peculiar feature of the integral membrane proteins, and that's why these integral membrane proteins can penetrate through the hydrophobic region of the plasma membrane. So these proteins interact with the hydrophobic core with a van der Waals interaction. So this is integral membrane proteins. Now these integral membrane proteins are of two types. I have told you that, or we have discussed it already, that if that particular amino acid chain passes through the plasma membrane only once, then it is called as a single pass integral membrane protein. If it passes through multiple times, then it is called as a multiple pass membrane protein. Now again, these single pass integral membrane proteins are divided into two types according to their orientation inside the plasma membrane. For example, we know that proteins have two domains, or we can say the two ends. One is called as a C terminus and another is called as a N terminus. So depending upon the orientation of this terminus and the N terminus, these proteins are divided into two types, type 1 and type 2 protein. Type 1 protein is called as a, or if it is a, if the C terminus of a single transmembrane protein is towards the cytoplasm, then it is called as a the type 1 protein. So in a membrane, in a plasma membrane, such type of a transmembrane proteins are called as a type 1 protein. Example here is a glycophorin or an insulin receptor. So this is known as the type 1 protein. Type 2 protein is that if that N terminus of this single pass protein is present towards the cytoplasm, then you can say that such a type of protein, membrane protein, is called as a type 2 protein. You can see here the N terminus of this particular membrane protein, transmembrane protein, is on the cytoplasmic side. So this is known as a type 2 protein. The example of this type 2 protein is a asialoglycoprotein receptor or transferrin receptor. So these are two types of integral membrane protein. Now another type of transmembrane protein is a multipass transmembrane protein, or this is also called as a type 3 protein, and these proteins pass through the plasma membrane multiple times. You can see here a long chain of amino acid is there, and this long chain passes through the plasma membrane multiple times, and that's why these are called as a multipass transmembrane proteins. And these proteins, they have the segment, or we can say the hydrophobic region, that or a non-polar region, that is made up of, or it forms a kind of alpha helix structure, conformation, and because of that they form many hydrogen bonds with the surrounding lipid molecules. So this is how that these multi-pass transmembrane proteins, they interact with the plasma membrane. Now, this alpha helix type of a structure is the most common type of a structure exhibited by transmembrane proteins, and that can be seen in many proteins like rhodopsin or G protein coupled receptors. So this is known as a multi-pass transmembrane protein. Now, another type of membrane protein is called as anchored membrane protein. And this anchored membrane protein is, if it is attached to the lipid chain, then it is called as a lipid chain anchored membrane protein. Now, the interaction in between these proteins and the lipid chain is covalent, and most of the lipid chain anchored membrane proteins, they are present on the inner leaflet of the lipid bilayer, or we can say on the C side of the plasma membrane. So this is known as a lipid chain anchored membrane protein. So you can see here, this is the lipid chain, and to this lipid chain, or this lipid chain is attached to the you can say the phospholipid or a lipid molecule that is present in the plasma membrane and on the inner leaflet of the plasma membrane. So these lipid chains, when they are attached to the lipid molecules on inner side, and to this lipid chain, then proteins are attached. So this is known as a lipid chain anchored membrane protein. So they attach with the lipid chain via forming a covalent bond. So and this is the lipid chain anchored membrane protein. Now another kind of anchored membrane protein is called as a GPI anchored membrane protein. The full form of a GPI is a glycosyl phosphatidyl inositol. Now this glycosyl phosphatidyl inositol acts like an anchor and is present on the outer side of the plasma membrane, or it is present on the outer leaflet of a plasma membrane, and to this the protein is attached. Now that's why this is known as a GPI anchored membrane protein. Now these GPI anchored membrane proteins are considered as a integral membrane protein. That is because even if carbonates are applied, detergent are applied, still these GPI anchored proteins cannot be separated, cannot be extracted from the plasma membrane, or cannot be separated from the plasma membrane. So these GPI anchored proteins, they are, you can see here, this is a GPI, or we can say that a lipid portion of a GPI is embedded in the plasma membrane, whereas the carbohydrate portion of GPI is present on the outside, to which this protein is attached, and this whole assembly is present on the outer leaflet of the plasma membrane. Now, being on the outer leaflet of a plasma membrane, it helps in communication with the other cells. So these GPI anchored proteins are mostly concentrated or aggregated in a lipid rafts, and these lipid rafts are very specialized structures for signaling and communication in between the cells. Now, another advantage of this GPI anchored protein is that they shows a more lateral mobility. So they can move more through this plasma membrane as compared to the peripheral membrane proteins. So this is the GPI anchored membrane proteins. So this is all about the membrane proteins. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel BAMU'S BioGenius for latest uploads. or like my videos. And if you have any queries, please comment. Thank you very much.